What's up, guys? Welcome to Covenant's Podcast with your host, Matt Shutrick, and myself, Peter Fundera. This is a podcast where we tackle current health news and hot nurse topics, one conversation at a time. How's it going, guys?
Emilio, say hello. So we have a special guest on today.
Hey, what's up, y'all? How you doing? Good to be here. It's really good to be here, actually.
So, guys, for those that are new, thank you for listening. This is a podcast, Nursing One. We bring on random guests. We talk about whole different other topics. If you're new or if you're returning, don't forget to smash the 5 stars. Shout out to, what's his name? Tanner. He gave us a really cool review.
We got a pretty cool Spotify review. Name was Tanner. Do you remember what he said on it?
He just says that he's vibing with the podcast. He listens to on his way to some kind of trip that he had. So shout out to that.
He takes road trips with us. So thank you, Tanner, for allowing us to be on your road trip. And keep it up, man.
And today, special guest, he is a nurse in the Bay Area, in the ER. He's been in healthcare for over 16 years. Shout out to that, because we're only at 4. He's passionate about nursing, and he's willing to have conversations that are going to promote a healing environment. So please welcome Emilio Vigil.
Hey, thanks, y'all. Emilio Vigil. Yeah, right, just like that. It's all good, man. It's all good. It'd be like that, though, when you're trying to pronounce patient names. You know,
I butcher them all the time.
Bro, especially like in the ER when you go out from the back and you come in and there's like 60 people in the waiting room. I'm like, I'm trying to get hold of Mr. Good and shit. You know what I mean? Like you just can't catch it. You know, you do your best. But it's good to be here. Thank you, Couple Nurses. I've been following y'all on Instagram for a while now. Appreciate you guys. I'm freaking proud of you guys. 2 male critical care nurses. You're content rich. You're legit. I appreciate you guys. Y'all, for those who are listening, I was just finding out a little bit about these 2 right here, and they both have names of apostles. I don't know how that happened. Polish parents, strong Catholic background. But knowing you guys knew each other since you were kids, that's encouraging. That's good. That's family right there, staying together. So I can appreciate that. It's good to be here.
Yeah, dude, thanks for joining us, man. Like me and Matt know each other for a while. You know, like you build these rich relationships with people, and you just don't know how long you're gonna stay friends for, or you know, like me and Matt, friends since the first grade, and ever since then, it's been like 25 years now. That's some shit.
I mean, 25 minus 4, because I was unaware of what was going on during that time.
We'll just throw it on there.
We'll just throw it on there. So it's kind of funny that you brought up where you're kind of forgetting names, because I do that shit all the time where I don't know my patient's name sometimes because I'm just stressed out. So I have a little, my little cheat sheet of notes, and I look and I'm like, hey, Susie Q or whatever. Sometimes I have to look on the board. Some nurses don't update the board. I'm just like, oh man, it's awkward right now. But I'm gonna call you Mrs., honey, sweetie, sir, and that all works,
Yeah. I just say boss and miss all the time, because sometimes for me it sucks, because if you have 2 patients with a similar last name, like Shay and Shears, I always get them flipped. Like when I walk into the room, I'm always like, hey, Mr. Shears, but it's like, oh, I'm Miss Shay. Oh, sorry, Miss Shay, my bad. It's not gonna happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned from the nurses back south. I mean, especially in California, you get a lot of nurses from back south. The southern nurses will baby up anything. They'll be like, all right, baby, this. All right, we're going to roll now. I'm like, that person's your same age. Why are you babying? You know what I mean? So that baby's just like, honey, miss, or, you'll get there somehow.
So you were a nurse in the southern states before? It's not just San Diego or San Francisco?
No, I mean, just in the sense what you learned from all of the nurses coming from back south into the Bay Area, which is pretty common.
Okay. But for your nursing career, have you just did the Bay Area, or have you been anywhere else?
The Bay Area, and then the outskirts of the Bay Area, going into areas are you familiar with Monterey and Salinas area? Which it's funny, even how the Bay Area, what it encompasses, you're going to hit people, some towns that are just migrant towns, and you have people from over the border where my first nursing job, they only spoke Spanish. About 60% of the patient population only spoke Spanish. I look super Latin in the face. So you would think that I spoke fluent Spanish. So, and it's what you learn in these different spaces. My assessment of Spanish had to get good real quick, which I'm of the firm belief to learn whatever you can learn from nurses from all over the world. That's the amazing thing about this job. You're going to meet nurses from all over the entire freaking globe. I think it's incredible.
Especially the Bay Area, man. Like when we went to Oakland, I saw so much ethnicity, so much different nationalities that you don't see here. Because in Chicago, it's predominantly Eastern European, just kind of more of the European descent. But in Oakland, you had Filipinos, you had people from different islands, and it was cool to see compared to here, where it's typally African American or typical white male Caucasian. compared to all these Asian descents. But it's cool that you brought up Spanish, because that's the one thing I regret in high school and college, is to not putting my like a full effort into Spanish classes. Because I took Spanish for like 4 years, and I only thing I know is like me gusta, football, and saca la basura, which is take out the trash, which is like completely pointless.
This is a good time to admit that you were cheating on your tests.
I was with the Spanish girls, Latinas,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I see it.
So Emilio, can you tell us a little about yourself, like background, just for someone that has no idea who you are, just to kind of paint a small picture before we kind of dive into topics?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually born and raised here in the Bay Area. I knew, when I was a kid, and I want to contribute my desire to get into emergency medicine from the old. Did y'all ever watch the old ER?
I did not. I watched MASH. You know what MASH is? Okay, it's like an old army show. Nothing to do with nursing at all.
Oh yeah, it's zero, right? Yeah, it's all good. I'm sure it's relevant in some capacity. Nah, bro, the old ER was like Grey's Anatomy on crack. It was legit emergency medicine with all of the right drama in it. And even as a kid, like I would watch it, and it would just be these insane, cases that came in. But something about it sparked something in me. And even as a child, when I would meet nurses or physicians, something about them when I interacted with them had something special for me. I would listen more intently, even though I didn't really understand what nursing was, what medicine was. I knew that when I heard it, it had a ring to me. Like if it was a coat, I would want to put it on. I wanted to be very close to it. And I remember I started out right out of high school in genetics and an internship, hopped into the pharmacy, worked in the pharmacy for a couple years, physical therapy. Most of my time in healthcare was spent in physical therapy, specifically most of the time in the ICU, actually. And that was an incredible job, because I remember one patient said, the physician saved my life, but physical therapy team brought me back to life. And you learn a lot about the human condition, the human experience, excuse me, from people who can't do nothing for themselves. Their bodies have completely given up. And I know y'all know more about that than most. And then finally transitioned into emergency room via the tech role, which has been one of my favorite roles thus far. And now I've been in ER for about 5 years now, and now a nurse.
And how is it being like an ER nurse? Because from my understanding, I've never done it. I've worked maybe one shift, and I was like a resource nurse in the ER. So I was just helping other nurses do things, just start an IV. How does it differ when it comes to pace, when it comes to other units? Why do you personally like it? I know it's just like a fast-paced position, correct?
I'll start that question with, there are two ways typically to enter into an emergency room for the start of shift. And in the ERs that I've worked in, it has been the same across all three of them. You can enter in through the front, which is where the patients step in, and you'll meet the triage team in that area. And upon the first 3 seconds of entering into the emergency room, you already know, and I've only worked night shift and evening shift, so typically this is true for most of those shifts. By the time that you enter in, you will know how your shift is going to go for the next 8, 10, 12, 16 hours, depending on what's in that waiting room. Within the first 3 seconds, the level of anxiety, the level of human suffering, the level of impatience, the level of fear, all of that energetic tone will hit you at that door. And you already know what tools you have to reach for. You already know what pace that you have to get into. And typically that first couple moments is just blinders, because you're not ready to help anybody. You need to get settled and get in your right head. The other entrance is through the ambulance bay. And once again, you already kind of have an idea of how shift is going to go when you pull up and you see there's 2 ambulances in the ambulance bay. There's 3 ambulances in the ambulance bay. And you get in, and the code rooms will be most proximal to the ambulance bay. Convenient, right? And I always take a quick peek in the code rooms. And depending on what you see in there, once again, you know how it's going to go down. Is someone being intubated? Is CPR in progress? Is nobody in there? Is an elder battling sepsis and pressures are, tanking? That sort of thing. And I find it a good ER sensibility that when you get into work, you find somebody, and it can really be anybody, but it is better if it's a more positive person. If you go straight to them as soon as you get to shift, straight up to them, and you go right up to their face and look them in the eye and you say, good morning, good evening. And this is a way to have a nonverbal pact internally that you are going to give the shift your willingness, that you're going to bring as much joy, you're going to be as engaged and dynamic as you were called to be. And you start that off in the beginning when you say good morning or good evening to your fellow nurses, because y'all about to do this thing together, certainly.
I love that, man. That's wow. That's like, that kind of hit me a little bit, you know, it made me feel kind of twinkly on the inside. Like just like acknowledging somebody, like your coworker, your peer, just with like a good morning, how are you? You know, good afternoon. It goes that far. Sounds so simple. And you have like almost like a contract and a bond after that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
I like how you bring that up when it's creating that environment, but the prevalence is when you walk into a shift and say something like that, and you have the best intention, correct? I feel like there's always negative Nancy's. There's always the Debbie Downers. This shift sucks. This is going on. And they're just in a state of anxiety, just like already like giving you that energy into the start of your shift. And I hate that. And I never try to do that. Maybe how was your shift? It was good. And I'll say, this has happened, but overall it was good. I never try to wish bad upon a nurse like that. And I feel like that happens far too often, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like what works best if you meet somebody like that, it's like negative, like that's, you could feel their kind of negative energy coming out. Just ask them like, hey, like, or if they bring up, yeah, my shift was shitty. Well, ask them, why was your shift shitty? Or if they say, hey, the first hour was so busy. Like, ask, why was it busy? And that way they feel like you're acknowledging their issue, and it kind of gives you like an idea in the back of your mind. Maybe they had to do a bunch of AccuChecks because they have 4 insulin trips and they're literally in and out of the rooms. So that's going to put a thought in the back of your head. Hey, maybe I have a few minutes here and there. Maybe I should just check someone's AccuCheck for them.
And sometimes I found that they think that their day was bad, and engaging them in the beginning almost startles them out of that, because they're almost, as nurses, we have an empathic nature, and we can pick up the energy of people around us, especially people who are dying. And sometimes I've encountered nurses like that, and it's just, good morning, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know, just kind of playing with them. And they're ready to play. They're ready to be that dynamic nurse, but it's almost like a thought got in front of their vision that was a negative thought and they couldn't shake it.
Exactly. It's a good point.
I like how you mentioned that, and you're very, very self-aware. I actually have a question to how did you become that, and how did you start noticing? Was it prior to nursing or being an ER tech? But what I wanted to bring up is like neuroplasticity, right? So nurses develop this habit of, let's just say, starting off the shift bad or being negative. And I feel like you build a program and build a routine, especially not switching jobs. And as soon as you enter work, you already get into that state of mind, because your mind and your body are constantly talking. So when you get into work, your body is already picking up on emotions your mind is telling you subconsciously, man, because it's pattern recognition, just like you say.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And it's subtle work. It's really, really subtle work. This is not something that you do like, today I'm going to be mindful. You know, that's not how it works. It's very subtle work. For me, I was raised in very spiritual environments where you strive to create healing spaces. And even though I'm not a very religious person anymore, I've retained that sort of spirituality. I brought it with me into my practice. And it's day after day, it's year after year, it's your entire career of becoming conscious. I've done this thing for 16 years now. And even though I'm a somewhat newer nurse, I have always found myself gravitating towards people who still love doing it. I've been in interviews where I remember I was in an interview a while back, and we did all the regular questions. We went through the whole thing, and I looked the manager right in the eye and I said, I have a question for you. I said, do you still love it? And the way, I swear she had a stroke. I was like, maybe light bells or something. And she said, some days, and it comes from the top and it flows down, but binding and fortifying relationships with people who still love it and have found really good ways to process this sort of energy and stress on the work site is vital, and you can move out from there.
How do you personally like deal with like stress and anxiety when it comes to ER? Because you seem to have, I'm sure you cope the proper way. I'm sure everybody has their bad coping mechanisms where they have to have a beer or a smoke or video games or whatever women do shop. Let's just say I want to be mindful of everyone. But what do you do, for example, when it comes to coping or after a long day or prior to your shift?
There's 3 things that I find very important to do. And it's funny that you say smoke. I remember in my first nursing job, there were times I would step out and I would have a cigarette. And I don't even smoke cigarettes, but I would go and have a cigarette with the charge nurse, and we'd be talking,
talking shit
and just having a blast out there smoking our cigarettes. And one day as I was smoking, I did a deep inhale and I realized I didn't want to smoke. I only wanted to breathe. And it was that moment of breathing, the inhalation, the exhalation of the smoking, that I realized, oh, I really just wanted a change of state. And breath work is so significant. I do box breathing. I do stoplight breathing, which is very similar to box breathing. Are you guys familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Can you go over that with us?
Certainly. So box breathing or stoplight breathing, imagine that you're on a racetrack and there's a stoplight at each end of the racetrack. As you're going up the racetrack, you're inhaling for 3 seconds. You're holding at the stoplight for 3 seconds. You're exhaling for 3 seconds. You're holding for 3 seconds. And it's at these stoplights that you're getting your power back, that you're getting your control back in that moment, because the body will, the CNS, everything is just going. But when you are consciously holding, you're taking a little bit of control back. And I found myself doing that in codes, because I remember my initial code, I was a mess. The body can't control that, especially if for an empath, the body can't control that wave of overwhelming fear and anxiety and suffering. It can't do that. So you have to find ways of speaking peace over your body, speaking peace into your body in these moments. In the ER, when you coin it organized chaos, the organized part needs to be you, because it's not going to be them, certainly. The other thing is cultivating really the work relationships is one of the key ways of surviving in the emergency room. And I'm sure even in the ICU, is those moments of stress relief when you're going down the hall and you're cracking up with your coworkers, or you have, you're in the med room and you're getting therapy. Lord Jesus, if they ever mic'd the med room, you know what I'm saying? Because all our therapy happens there. Sometimes we need to go in there and be like, this mother, you know what I'm saying? It's just a release, and you cannot do that if you do not have a relationship established with those other healers, those other nurses, physicians, techs, lab. That's your family. And if you don't have that relationship with them, you can't de-stress. The third thing I would say is solitude. It's the work that happens in your quiet space. And when you think about it, it's almost like when you plug in your iPhone when it's completely depleted, and you're trying to watch YouTube and you're trying to be on Facebook when it's plugged in, it's not going to charge the same way from when you just leave it in solitude and let it do its thing. You need to be dynamically in solitude. You need to be conscious so that you can fill up and be ready to pour out when you step into a space as chaotic as the emergency room.
You have a very beautiful way of articulating this. Like, a lot of nurses miss this. And I feel like if you're like with the solitude thing you were saying, is I feel like you can't love or take care of anybody else if you're not going to love and take care of yourself. Like you can't be alone by yourself. I don't think you shouldn't be able to be with anybody else. Like, you got to first learn what moves you and kind of how to take care of yourself before you kind of could step into someone else's life.
And just to give you guys a perspective, both of you guys actually, because I'm travel nursing, I don't have that same dynamic at work that you guys have when it comes to having teammates. Like, I can't go vent to strangers that are staff nurses. It's just not the same.
You got me, man.
I mean, yeah, I could text you and I actually do that sometimes. Like, fuck, bro, I'm about to get this train wreck, man. But yeah, I do miss that, man. I have my awesome coworkers like Jess and Rachel. I remember back in the day when I was at LaGrange, like, it was fun, man. Like, you get to talk shit, laugh around, bedroom, of course, vent. And I just don't have anybody. And sometimes,
but you know what? Some of my favorite people that I've encountered in this work have been travel nurses. And the short time that you have with them, it's almost like a non-committal love. Like, you just step into friendship because of the commonality of nursing. And it's just, when you find your tribe, you're going to vibe on the same wavelength. And you can just, there's ways to do it, but I definitely understand it. And that could be pretty scary, I think. I've not travel nursed yet, even though I have worked in a couple ERs. But that does seem, I can see that part being difficult, certainly.
Are you thinking about travel nursing? Is it like in the back of your mind anywhere?
One day, certainly.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
The other part is, the Bay Area has so much and is so diverse, and there's so many different hospital systems out here, and I've already worked for a couple of them, so it's almost like I get that experience here. Yeah. So pro versus con.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, Matt's seen a few hospitals. Like he's been to LA, San Diego, and Oakland. So he's kind of got the Northern California perspective and a Southern California perspective. Because even though healthcare is supposed to be, I guess you could say, almost like universal, like each hospital and each kind of location deals with different things, and it has their own way of managing, the hospital for the most part. And I really like that you brought up those 3 reasons, because like if you're missing those 3 things, like that's going to contribute to burnout. If you can't take care of yourself, if you don't have a good coworker relationship, if you can't let loose in the hospital, that's going to contribute so much to burnout. Like even smoking, you're smoking because you wanted to breathe. Because sometimes it gets so busy, we don't take a break. Maybe you didn't want to smoke. You just want to have that. You just wanted to be outside the hospital, just get away from that environment for a little bit. And smoking provides
just a change of state. Right. Certainly.
So yeah, burnout's burnout's huge. Nursing as a career is physical, mental, external. It's literally everything. And this burnout is so prevalent, and I feel like it's still not spoken about enough as it should be.
Are you ready for that topic? Are you ready to dive into PTSD versus burnout?
Yeah, we can do that, man. We can do that.
So that's like the soul of our conversation we really wanted to have with Emilio here is how maybe, as you know, and we had some research that we looked up, maybe we're being misdiagnosed, just like in World War I, PTSD was diagnosed. Can you scroll down for that note? I'm actually curious. I wrote down something. In World War I, the veterans were labeled as maligners, and they were shamed. And they basically were told that they don't have what it takes to be a soldier, So they were misdiagnosed. It was then considered to have soldier's heart, and then it was changed to battle fatigue. And I don't know exactly when a DSM-5 came out and coined the word PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. But this kind of loops around to nursing that, hey, maybe we call it burnout, but maybe it's actually PTSD for nurses, and we're misdiagnosing this. And there's something that's not being talked about because, nurses, we could take a lot of shit and we could keep getting stuff, we take shit from patients, we take shit from upper management, and we just take it. And maybe we cope negatively. And this is something that we have to talk about.
Yeah. And we take shit from each other. That's the other part to that. And when you say, when you talk about you've been to different places and you've been to different hospital systems, hospitals typically are a reflection of their community, so who's working inside is the same folks who are a part of the community, and all of their qualities there will also be present inside of the system, and the system functions to try to iron out these things and to kind of conform the people to the system. But when you talk about burnout versus PTSD, like when I think of burnout, I almost think of just like a bonfire, right? Like you had some wood, and when that thing is burned out, the resource is gone, the resource is done. But PTSD resounds a little bit more with me. And, when you're working in these stressful ass environments where the level of expectation is incredibly, incredibly high, and the amount of people that we need to serve and treat and tend to is incredibly high, and the level in which we need to do that is through the roof, but the sense of control is very, very low. And year after year, operating in this, it has an effect on the psyche. But I kind of want to go back to, I think I'd read somewhere in the note you had the definition from for PTSD, for post-traumatic stress.
Do you want to read it for you?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So according to DSM-5, PTSD can stem from experiencing trauma firsthand, as well as from witnessing a traumatic event, learning it happened to a loved one, and from repeatedly hearing details about one. Traumatic events typically involve death, sexual violence, and other injury. So not necessarily has to be firsthand event. Like I don't gotta go through the event to get PTSD. I could hear about it. Like Matt might have, let's say Matt gets raped. I might get PTSD from that because he's my good friend. And now like I'm worried about him. So I have PTSD about that. It could happen directly, and it's not just a firsthand approach. PTSD can stem from literally anything. And then it's manifests several ways, including unwanted memories, flashback, nightmares, and extreme stress when reminded about the triggered event.
Absolutely. And I'll add loss of memory to that. But I kind of want to get into the definition before I kind of share how I see it, is just kind of like in the studying and exposure I've had to different physicians, different researchers, different spiritualists, different teachers. is that almost the definition to trauma specifically is not necessarily the effects, not so much in the symptomology of it, but more as trauma is anything that separates you from your wholeness. Trauma is anything that separates you from the dynamic calling that you operate in which you are. And so year after year of having to put up walls, year after year of having to operate with limited resources and trying to put out all these fires, but yet you don't have the resources and the capability or the manpower to do that in a humanly kind way, in a timely manner. And year after year, when you kind of have this separation from your wholeness, in my opinion, and this trauma kind of sets in, you kind of become a contracted nurse. Almost you become like a stick figure of the more complex whole nurse that you are, and that's what you're called to be. So even the skills that you have honed, even all of the abilities that you have, even the emotional capabilities and capacity you have for human suffering is contracted. You don't have as much access to it. And year after year, going in this way, especially for nurses who have an empathic nature, it becomes strained. And I've noticed one huge symptom that happens when you kind of get this limited access to your empathic nature is we stop teaching. We stop teaching our patients, or we stop waiting for the clarity in the patient's eyes for what we're teaching. We're just kind of like, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I checked that I gave the education, but you don't wait for the clarity. There's no follow through. And so it's the thing about nursing and the thing about being called to this, if it's that serious for you, because for some people it's not that serious for them, or they're not quite in that space where they've kind of given their willingness to really do this thing as a life calling. And you can get to that. You don't have to start there. You can grow into that, certainly. Is you have to choose your calling again and again and again and again and again and again and again. You talk to these nurses, and I've talked to nurses who have been in this thing for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. One of the educators at my first job was, she retired after 40 years in this thing. You find, and these are people that still come to work and love to do what they do. Find those people. And if you can't identify, or if they can't verbalize what it is that makes them successful, just be in their presence. Be in their presence so that your presence can kind of also be affected and change, and be nutritious. Be medicine in a way for the people in these beds, certainly.
That's deep, man. You have a very deep. It's kind of funny because I feel like I'm empath as well. I am for
yeah,
sure.
You are.
And because you are the same way, you feel people's energy so much more. And it's weird to explain, and people don't understand it, but you just feel people's crap, dude. And they have to just be around you and erupt. For some reason, you have to learn how to make a force field barrier around them, because it'll negatively affect you, right? And one thing I wanted to bring up is when you said patient education, where you lose that, it's like compassion fatigue, right? From PTSD or burnout, where you're mentally checking out. And I'll admit it myself. You could admit it. I'm sure you have. How often have you went on the education section under the EMR, electronic medical record, and just said, check, 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 check. I educated them, done. And then you put patient, acceptance, educated, needs reinforcement, done. And you just sign it off because you're just fatigued from everything that you're doing, task management. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing that we forget, hey, these people go home, they don't know the shit that we know. They don't have the education. They don't know. But yet we're taking that away from them. The most important thing probably that a patient could have, we're cutting them short because of the stress, the unfair ratios, the no lunch breaks, the fatigue, the what do you want to call it? The low staffing, just everything just keeps piling onto us. Oh, hey, we have 90% on CAUTIs this time. Well, and then we're just getting bombarded with negativity, man. And we as nurses, maybe it's a calling, just like you said, when we into this job, we're put into an environment with so much sympathetic nervous system stimulation that we can't continue doing it for a long time. When we get fatigued, bro, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane how we can be depleted like that. It's and I hear what you're saying, like when you're charting, but you listen, if you chart it you did it. No, I'm just playing.
What do you mean? It's true, bro.
Right, I completely did the whole thing. And we have to take responsibility for what we can do. We can't, because we're shorting ourselves too. You can't be proud of what you're doing and be shortened like that. And I've done it before, but we can take responsibility. But part of that also falls on the system. This is one thing that the system cannot. And when you say, what is the system? Is it this non-person that kind of umbrellas us? No, it's people. People create the system, and administrators create the system, and nurses also have a part in creating the system. And what they allow and the time they allow it in is part of their responsibilities to help us create the space in order for us to successfully do that. You talk about you getting these frequent flyers. Why are you always getting these frequent flyers who are A&O times 4, have no psych issues? There is a knowledge deficit there, and who is taking the time to actually sit with them and wait for the clarity to come into their eyes and make a pact with them. I had a patient come in. He had taken his nighttime insulin. It's like 40 units or something through the roof. And then he took it again because he forgot. So he came in with stroke-like symptoms, and he was just so fearful. He must have been like in his 41 or 42. He was a really young guy. And the wife was there, and I don't know what to do. He's not taking care of his body. And I said, wife, come here, take his hands. I grabbed their hands. I said, we make a pact right now. We make a pact right now to help save each other and to connect to our own bodies. We have to keep people accountable, and we have the knowledge to be able to do that. But do we have the willingness and the space to be able to do that? Do we have the boldness to actually engage other human beings like that? I don't know. You tell me. It's our own personal commitments to it.
Yeah, it's hard because I'm sure you get frequent flyers. I work in a very specialized unit. We do a heart failure and LVAD, so we retain our population. If they go to like a different hospital, they automatically get shipped to us because we did the heart transplant, we did the LVAD, they go to our CHF clinic. So, but I get burnt out a lot from teaching the same patients repeatedly the same thing over and over again. Like, hey, take your anti-rejection medications. No, because this has happened. There's only so much I could do within the time frame that they are at the hospital. And what happens majority of the times, there's a point that this patient reaches where they just become really non-compliant on their, Coumadin or the anti-rejection medications. They're sick of taking this medication. They're sick of having this pump. They're sick of just doing what they're supposed to do. And I see them a lot. I see them, once a month or a few times a month. I see them every 6 months, every few months. And it takes a toll on me personally because
absolutely.
I could, no matter what I do, I could, I look them right in the eyes, tell them this and this, hey, you're here because you keep doing this. Like, we saved your life 2-3 times. You're not going to have a 4th or 5th time. You're not going to. Like, your pump's going to clot off. There's going to be so much times that we could exchange that pump before there's nothing else for us to do. And they agree, yeah, like they follow their low sodium diet, their fluid restriction in the hospital. You send them out and bang, that's it. They're right back in the door. And the main issue with that is I feel like a lack of education at an early age, poor coping in youth, and a very bad social dynamics. Those are the 3 main things that I see that take a good patient in a hospital and completely turn them upside down once they leave. It's just those 3 things: lack of education, social dynamics, and a rough upbringing. And it's sad. So I feel like we as nurses, we see the acute version, but there's something that has to be done preventative. With the whole education at a younger age, better schools.
And I mean, and such is the limitation to modern medicine is we are trying to discern, is this a knowledge thing? Is this just a body thing? And we can't see that the connection between the mind and the body, and we don't have the tools to be able to help establish them and help them build a relationship to their body, especially in acute care. When do we have the time to do it? There are limitations to what we do, and there are limitations to only approaching it from a scientific perspective. It's tough work, and it's kind of like, especially in the ER, where the moment that you have with them has to be an excellent moment because you only have 10 seconds. You don't have more than that sometimes. You really don't, and that's a reality to it.
Sometimes healthcare reminds me of the military-industrial complex. I'm not sure if you know what that
is. I haven't heard that.
But that's basically like, there's war going on, and then these companies make materials for war. They make weapons, things like that. Like, we're supposed to live in a society where we progress to being more cooperative. but there's still war going on, and there's still businesses profiting off war. So kind of same thing with healthcare. Like we have all these pharmaceutical companies.
You just said something right there.
Yeah, we have all these pharmaceutical companies. We have all these healthcare systems. We're supposed to be getting healthier, getting better, but you still see the same shit. You know, it's a revolving door into the hospital. We treat, they send them out, they're back, give them medication. They don't adhere to it because we don't really expect them to, and then they're right back in, and just like a vicious cycle. And nothing ever gets solved because the corporations are making money, so they're not gonna really change or act any different if their CEOs are trying to, you know, make their next percentage of income or whatever. There's really nothing that is kind of pushing for benefit from a health standpoint because everyone's making all this money and no one really wants to change.
Yeah, huge disconnect.
And I wanted to add on to that. And also you have the meetings that happen with staff nurses and managers and then CEOs and whatever, different district managers of hospitals. They're not talking about creating a healing environment or why this patient is having this done. Their main thing is just these numbers. What are we going to do here? Okay, nurses, no overtime. Make sure you clock out at 12:12. Don't go over 12:03 because you're getting double time. Like those are the conversations they're having. They're not having the conversations that we're having that at the end of the day, I feel like would make a bigger impact on a larger scale in society. But it's me and you, we're having this conversation. It's not putting monies in anybody's pocket. And that's why it just gets, you know, brushed away.
It's hospitals cutting costs, making changes, and trying to improve patient satisfaction all at the same point while trying to cut out the middleman for the most part. It's not how it works.
Yeah, and there's, and that's that's, there, in a way, there are partners. You know, the system, we partner with the system in order for us to enter into that space and do what we do. So they are our partners. I think one responsibility on our end is to do what we can, where we can, in a limited amount of time to humanize the hospital experience. Because in the hospital, it can be very inhumane and I know y'all have seen in the ICU, especially in the ICU, where it's almost inhumane to keep somebody alive.
Dude,
we're keeping the body alive longer than they should have ever been alive for months at a time. What are we doing? And I only say that in the moments that we have, we can humanize a thing. For example, in the ER, one thing I learned from one of my favorite charge nurses ever, and this was when I was a tech, is just from watching her, is when somebody died in the ER, we were required as a matter of honor and a matter of respect to take a warm blanket from the warmer and place it over their body. It didn't matter how long they had been gone. It didn't matter if there was family there or not. And, you know, sometimes there was a big family there and you took the warm blankets in and you know, does anybody want to place, you know, the warm blankets on your loved one, you know? And it was just in that moment where you build a culture. You take a moment to build the culture of humanizing that moment. Because when people feel that they were treated well, when they were touched well, it changes the perspective of that encounter, you know, and that's where we can step in and do what we do as we partner with the system. And perhaps we can build a culture and touch other areas to where that now the work family can operate in this and it could be a more fluid, wholesome thing, certainly.
That's for something special. Did a family ever ask you to pray with them before?
To pray? It happened before plenty of times where I hugged them. They came back to me. I had episodes where I for example, so I don't know how familiar with, I'll just break it down for the guests. So basically, if you have life support connected, you have a breathing tube down your throat. In order to take that tube out, we have to put the patient on something called CPAP, where they're breathing on their own for 30 minutes to see if they meet qualifications. And we turn off all their sedation so they're completely consciously aware. And I would ask the patient, because he was very sick, he had cancer. And I'm like, you know, do you want to live? Like, do you want to continue doing this? Because the next step is to have a breathing tube in your throat, a trach. And he said no. His wife already died. He's been single. When I had him before getting intubated, because he had a huge surgery, I forgot the name, but they removed part of the pancreas, gallbladder, part of the intestines. Like, he was talking about his wife, Margie. She already passed away. She is all he was holding on to. Like, they're ready to meet on the other side or whatever dimension, correct? And the next day I see the family and hey, listen, I talked to Frank or whatever his name is, and he told me he doesn't want to continue doing this. He's suffering. What happens in a couple of days? He gets a trach tube. He gets a peg tube. Where is he going? To the nursing home. What's going to happen there? We already know the freaking series of events. And that stuff really hits me, man. And it becomes traumatic for you when you get these patients that are contracted, they're contracted, they can't do anything. They're coughing their lungs out. You're just suctioning them. And that face that they make that, they're like choking on something, that's just traumatic now that I look at it. And it messes with me, just like you said, the psyche, because we know that these patients have no quality of life, yet it is our job to keep them alive. And that's where when your spirit and your body, like you fight with yourself, because you have to do the job at the end of the day.
Yeah. We have to listen. We have to listen to them. That reminds me, she must have been about 95 or 96 years old. She was an older woman. She kept herself very clean. She lived alone, and she came in, and we almost coded her. Well, she came in with a bunch of empty Norco bottles, and she had saved all of her Norco bottles for months. It must have been probably 6-7 months, maybe even a year worth of Norco. And she had taken them all at once, and she was attempting to end her life. But this woman had outlived her children. She'd outlived her husband. She was alone. Some people just know when they want to go, and we need capacity to listen. I hear you when you say you have those ICU patients, because when I worked in physical therapy in the ICU, they call us in on these cases, and it was like, this person's not living, you know what I'm saying? But we're just torturing their physical body even more, and where's the place where we humanize that experience, and we say it's okay to let go, and that's a reflection of us not understanding death, and perhaps we don't fully understand life. Those two go hand in hand. And I respect the ICU nurses. That's intense.
Do you think religion plays a lot with that? Like with the family not being able to let go?
I do think it plays a part. I think it's multifaceted. I also think the scientific mind and ignorance, and what we allow the public to think about what the capabilities of science. And we don't explain the quality of life that the patient's going to have when we're in the ER, and we're like, do you want everything to be done? Do you want us to pump on their chest? Do you want to be intubated, a tube down their throat? That we don't explain that you won't be able to talk to your loved one. You won't be able to engage your loved one like that. It's just in that frenzy, you'll sell your soul to get whatever it is that you think is going to happen. And that's not a reality.
And when you do bring that up, like I brought up to a family one time where their loved one wasn't doing good. We do that it was going to end up being a code, and it's going to be a slow code. And they got upset when I told them that, hey, your family members most likely not going to come out of this. They're not going to be the same ever again. Their brainstem is herniating. So it's only a matter of time before they start to code. And they're like, no, they got really upset with me for me being honest and telling them like the whole disease process. And I ended up having to have another nurse go in there and talk to them because they were really upset. So even though as nurses, you try to kind of bring them back down to earth and explain the graphic nature of the situation that's going to come if they code, families just don't want to hear it. Sometimes they're which I understand, because they're dealing with is a lot. It's something that I don't wish on my worst enemy, and it's really hard to deal with. So I understand people might not be in their normal state of mind, but like you said, it's hard to talk to them about it, because a lot of times they just throw out the window anyways, and they just do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And also the people that come to the hospital, like we have to realize that they're in a state of anxiety. They're in the sympathetic nervous system. They're so narrow-minded, and their vision, their thoughts, like they're not understanding everything that's going on, man. And it makes our job so much harder. And you guys kind of made me bring up a story that I got kind of chills, if you can see it. But it was a young guy in his 40s, man. Ischemic bowel, came up to me, blew on the face, man. We intubated him. He had a GI bleed. He went into DIC, which is you clot so much, you have micro clots all over, and you just stop losing circulation. He was on 4 pressors. It was an Indian family, and he had two girls back home, man. And I actually had only one patient because the Chargers took my patient. I was doing everything I can on this motherfucker, man. I was trying to keep this guy alive so much. And then I knew when the epi is up to 20, the levo, I just went up to 30 because there's nothing else I could do. and it was just a matter of time. And the family was completely delusional. The father's asking me, how is he doing? They asked me if the panel came back for the flu because he was on contact.
Yeah.
I'm like, right now, that is not our concern. I'm just trying to keep him alive. And then he ended up coding. His wife became freaking, lightheaded, gave him a seat. Let's just say 30 minutes went past, and the father was asking me if they could bring the body home. And I'm like, I don't think we could do that. I had to ask my charge. I don't know if that's the case. And then the father, I kind of step away from the room, and he's screaming to his son. He's hitting his fucking body. And I'm just like, I don't see this, but I'm hearing it. And I'm like, man, that's rough. That's rough. And that brings me to wrap this up, a study that I found online. It's the study from the Journal of Heart and Lung Transplantations. Mm-hmm. And because we're talking about PTSD, they found that critical care nurses meet the criteria for PTSD by 48% based on the study. So the shit that I see, it makes me kind of wonder, can we possibly have a little bit of PTSD? Or should we bring awareness to this? Because there's maybe nurses that are walking around without even knowing it, man. And they're just burnt out, calling off, and they're not even aware of it, man.
I mean, I personally, since we're on PTSD, we're sharing stories. I used to have a little bit of PTSD. I kind of got over it now, but I was like fresh off orientation, maybe like 3 or 4 months in being alone. And I've had an LVAD patient, and he was in a recliner, and I wanted to get him to the bed. So I actually had him stand up, and he ended up having a stroke right when he stood up. I don't know what happened with him, but he was an LVAD, so unfortunately, they are more prone to having a stroke. Out of nowhere, he just went limp. I pushed him on the bed, got him down to the CT. He had like a 5 or 6 millimeter left to right shift, and it was inoperable. And that gave me PTSD. Every time I stood somebody up out of the chair, I was like, well, fuck, this guy was mid-30s, super young, with an LVAD, and he had a stroke on me. Imagine what this grandma, age 60, is going to do if I stand her up. And that was always in the back of my mind for solid like year and a half. And I finally got over it. I'm like, even if they stroke out, nothing you could do about it. Just treat the cause and go. But that was like super scary. And I was off orientation 3 or 4 months in. I literally shit my pants. I'm like, dude, I killed this guy by standing him up out of the fucking recliner. I was like, no way. And he was 34, 35 years old. And like solid year and a half, I was scared to get people up. I was like, we're not going to get up to the morning.
Yeah.
Because when Dr. Brown Nicholas helped me,
Yeah, and it's true, and it's important. It's worth mentioning to all the nurses listening that you can be traumatized at any age, at any place in your career. Something traumatic can happen, and you don't have permission to not figure out how you're going to heal from that. This is difficult work, and if you want to be successful, you have to figure that out. You don't have permission to always come into work and be that stoic battle axe nurse. You don't have permission to do that. I'm sorry. And even in the ER, we see children code, we see them come in wounded or hurt or violated in some way. And it's, just the other day, I had a kid who came in and he was autistic. So it's a little bit more difficult to diagnose children who have autism. But, he had a brain bleed. And so to see, or when a child is coding, or when you've lost a child, the sound that a tribe makes or a family makes when they give voice to their grief all at the same time, I'm sure y'all know about it, is traumatizing, is terrifying. And in those moments, all of your skills, all of your capacity to help other human beings has to be there. You can't, in that moment, choose to be hands off. We don't have permission to do that. And so it's tough work, but if you're called to it, you'll find a way. You'll find a way. Absolutely.
That's very intense because I've never seen like a code on a kid before or anything. The craziest thing I've probably seen with children is having to deal with a family and a child after the, what's it called, shaken baby syndrome, where the family shakes the baby so much where I guess the brainstem gets herniated or gets cut off or something. And then the fact that that the family has done this to the baby and yet they're still around it and like acting like nothing happened, like they don't know what caused this, because there's a gap in time where the state hasn't taken the kid out of their care yet. So you can't tell the family no, because technically you know what happened, but on paper and legally there's no proof of this happening. that was probably the most, like, the saddest thing I ever seen in my life. And that's kind of what kind of drew me to go into the NICU when I graduated nursing school, but there was no jobs available for me. So I had cardiac ICU.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to NICU for that sense, was that I like to deal with kids that come into this world so small, so vulnerable. And I wanted to be there, like, for them, because as an adult, you play out your life and you have a say on what goes on. You make choices. As an infant, as a kid, you don't have no choices. You don't have a say in that your mom was an alcoholic, that she did crack while you were in the womb, and you come out, a preterm. You don't have that kind of choice. So I really wanted to deal with these vulnerable kids because I feel like I play the biggest role with them compared to an adult where you keep telling them to change, and they're still 40, 50 years old and they don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard nurses say, when I can tell they're a little bit off, and I say, what's wrong? Oh, I just lost my faith in people, and it's, oh, I just can't stand blah, blah, blah. They have to put a separation in between them and other people because of what they've seen, and they don't have capacity in that moment to be able to deal with it, and that's where the family unit of coworkers comes in, and working in the ER. I remember there was a child who had coded on my first job. It was my first nursing job. And it was the most traumatizing thing I had ever seen in my life. When I tell you about trauma, whew, Jesus. But I remember I had to go to triage right after the code. And I can hear the family just wailing and wailing. I mean, everybody in the waiting room can hear it. And then I got a call, you got to hurry up and get to the ambulance bay. There's a woman in labor. Hurry, bring a wheelchair. And, it was one physician who said it's in the ER, it's almost like the mosaic of the human experience. One goes out, one comes in, and all these parts are moving. All this chaotic nature is happening because it's almost like the nature of being human is to be thrusted into chaos. And you have to find your place in that and find your role in that and be okay with the effort that you gave that situation and be okay to go home with that and be proud of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dude. Like when I was younger and I thought about nursing, it's nowhere near what I nursing is for right now.
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit.
All right, how about we just give them the reality of the people that are listening, the nursing students. What did you think, for example, going into nursing, and what's the shitstorm that came out of it?
Bro, are you asking me?
I'm asking you, man. I'm ready to hear it.
Bro, I don't think I knew. I didn't in my mind really put together what nursing was. Even watching the old ER stuff, I didn't exactly know what that meant. What they don't teach you in nursing school is how to be thrusted into the human experience. That part, interacting with other humans and all of the levels that they can be at. That part I necessarily wasn't ready for. I had the benefit of gradually going through a hospital system in different roles, genetics, physical therapy, the pharmacy, before I got to the ER. So people going straight into critical care as a new nurse, going into the ICU or the ER, I can't imagine these poor little souls being thrusted, starting at Subway, and then now you go work and try and save people's lives. This ain't putting sandwiches together. It's complex on a level that even doctors and physicians and people who've studied anthropology and all how social interactions work would struggle with. That is the complexity of being a nurse, man, is you have to be a healer, and you have to be somebody who's willing to get down and come to the level of that human suffering in a humble way to be really effective. But you don't learn that until years and years of going in. You develop all of these skills. Nursing school, it doesn't even it's barely touching the surface. If you're going into this thing, this is going to be a lifelong journey of learning about the human experience, for freaking sure. But there's also a lot of joy to be had, even in suffering moments. I've dealt with a lot of cancer patients, even children who had cancer. I remember this 15-year-old, he came in short of breath. I can't remember if it was lymphoma or something was growing on his lung. I can't remember what it was, but he was like, no more, I am done. I don't want one more intervention. And some of the staff was crying and the mother was crying. But when you walked in the room and you encountered him, it was like you walking into the room of an old sage or something. Like in his heart and his spirit, he knew that he was done. And I went in there and we were kind of cracking jokes and being silly and stuff. So even in the last moments, if you have that humorous part to you, that joy inside, You can walk into a room of somebody who's dying and be completely cracking up. I've seen it, and I do it all the time. It's a way of being on the floor and in these spaces. It's for you if you want it, or you can choose to just be, a battle axe nurse. I don't know, it's up to you.
And definitely when it comes to death, the patient has to accept that part of his life where he's at, death and suffering. Because if he's not accepting that stage, the energy that he's transmitting. He is upset. He could be rude. There's those patients, and he has resentment, anger, and sometimes even freaking regret. And that seeing regret in someone's eyes is freaking horrible, man. It's tough, man. And I don't know what else to say about regret. When you look at people's eyes and they have it, I don't know how to describe it.
There's a handful of times where like people were at the brink of death, and you're like they were happy before, and then the physician broke the news like, hey, there's no really more interventions or therapies we could do. And like I come on shift, like, everything okay? And it's like, yeah, doctor told me that they're not gonna do anything else for me. And it's like, all right, do you want to talk about anything? He's like, no. I'm like, well, what? Someone's on your mind. Tell me about it. He's like, well, man, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. Well, I wish. No, I can't fly. My children live in Texas. I haven't seen them in 12 years. I wish I was able to fly with them or fly there and see them. Now I can't because it's too high risk. And that's like the worst thing. Like that, like you said, like that regret or that like resentment towards somebody. Like you could tell that now when shit hits the fan, there's so many things they want to do that it took for granted, and now they can't do it. And it sucks. Like it's heartbreaking not only for me but for them. And then you slowly see them deteriorate even quicker because they have that back of their mind, like, hey, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I wasn't a good father, I wasn't a good son, a good husband. And because of all that, people don't come to visit him because there's no family around him, and he's literally in there alone, no support. Kids don't know what's going on, wife doesn't know what's going on because he's completely isolated himself, and now he's full of regret, and he just deteriorates so quick. They tell him he has like 3 months to live, and we have intubated by like day number 7. They go down quick.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe if there's nothing more for him to learn, maybe you as somebody outside of that can learn something and spread that to others. But even I mean, I remember this young cat. He must have been about 30. He had cancer. I mean, if breaths were measured in time, he had about 1 week left, and pain was an issue, so he came in the ER. And I was accessing his port, and I noticed this tattoo. It was half of sun and a half moon. It was a new tattoo. And in Spanish, this is where I barely knew Spanish at this point. In broken Spanish, I told him that I liked his tattoo. He barely rustled. As I was charting, I noticed that we had the same birthday. And so when I went back in the room, I told him in Spanish, like, oh, we have the same birthday. And he kind of like lifted up, barely. I mean, he could barely move. He lifted up, and he had the brightest, cleanest, like hazel looking eyes. And he said, El Rey, which is like the king. He was a Leo. And there was a real brightness in his eyes. And it's even like at that cusp of death, of last moments, you can connect and give them something. It don't even have to be about memories. It could just be about accessing joy or human interaction. And there could be something for both of you in that, and I think that's a powerful, wonderful thing. I didn't realize this conversation was going to go in all those moments. I hope you guys are okay with that.
Yo, keep it up, man. Like it's sad somebody passed away, but when you said, when you lock eyes with them, it's almost like they're passing on a little bit of their spirit or their energy to you.
Yes.
Like it's like thank you. Here, I'm gonna hook you up with a little bit of this.
Yeah. And that's for us. And that's as nurses, we get that. That's part of what the benefit for us is, that we are a recipient to these powerful, powerful human experiences. And we are asked to participate with that. And burnout, PTSD, all of that is in opposition to us being a benefit and a benefactor to that. And if we don't choose ourselves, if we don't step back into our wholeness, we miss out on a whole career of that. And that's a damn shame. That's a damn shame. We have a responsibility to stay in our own, to stay in our calling for freaking sure. And we can't necessarily blame the hospital system, because if that's the case, then you move on. At some point, then you have to find a different facet for you to do what you love.
Have you ever felt burnout? Like real burnout? How'd that feel?
Absolutely. You feel helpless. You feel helpless in a way. There's even, I mean, and you're going to feel it, even when you think you have all the skills, all the tools, it's going to come and knock on your door. It was a couple of weeks ago. I was running around like a fool. I had the hallway assignment, which is the most assignment in the ER for. So I'm in the hallway. I'm trying to run around and grab resource because nothing is where you want it to be, right?
Of course.
And I had a lady hypertensive through the roof, another one with the flu in the hallway. It was a bunch of bullshit. And I'm running around, and one of the old school trauma nurses stopped me. And he was like, "Hey, yeah, which one of your patients is dying?" And I'm like, no, but I got this, I got that. Well, but which one's dying? And I'm thinking he wants to help me. And I'm like, well, which one's dying? And I said, well, none of them are dying. And he's like, exactly. And walked away,
Damn.
And he, and there's something to learn from these elder nurses, and I said, elder doesn't mean old, for you battle axe nurses who are getting offended, elder doesn't mean old. It just means you're more experienced. You see it in a better way than another nurse does. And I needed that moment to snap my ass back into gear because I was all frenzy, and I'm not as beneficial to others if I'm in a frenzy. That's what you battle in the ER is you pick up their energy, you pick up their urgency. And it doesn't mean it's an emergency. It just means it's urgent. It needs to get done. And if you pick that up and you hold that from every patient, you're running around like a damn fool.
So because you're an empath, that means you're picking up people's energies quicker, correct? Mm-hmm. How have you personally realized being an empath? How do you cope with those energies being thrown at you and then catching yourself, I need to slow down. No one is dying, right? How do you pick up on that, and how do you cope with it, and how have you dealt with it when you kind of came to that realization?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There are a couple meditative practices that I use, and I can go over those. There's just two of them. But it's when you are more of yourself on the floor, more of that wholesome nurse, more connected to your wholesomeness, more in your authenticity, there's space in that. There's room in that to kind of encompass people's suffering. And as you can go in and out of rooms and you learn to, almost like when you go to the store and you just window shop, you're not touching and picking stuff up, you're just window shopping. So all of that energy there, don't touch it. You can interact with it, but don't pick it up. Don't hold on to it. And that takes some practice, and that takes some inner work, certainly. There are... And I learned a lot about that as a tech. When I was a tech, as soon as I got to work, I would walk quickly the entire ER. Even in areas that weren't my section, I would look in each room, look at the patient's face, look at the monitor, look at the patient's face, and I would go in each room and I would just test the energy in each room and just see, who was dying, who wasn't dying, who was urgent, who was emergent. And you kind of learn how to interact with these energies because it happens on a volume of that is staggering. And there's two meditative practices that I utilize outside of work to help me while I'm in work. You have to do this work outside so that it's useful inside.
It's like a muscle, right? It has to kind of grow and get bigger and keep getting stronger to use it.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Both of them I learned from Dr. Rachel Remen. Have you ever heard of Dr. Rachel Remen?
No, who is she or he?
Oh my God. Rachel Remen is an old school physician born in New York, taught in San Francisco, a class called The Healer's Art. And she wrote a couple books, Kitchen Table Wisdom, something else, but y'all get into her gold to the healing community. Two of these meditative practices I learned from her. And they both do two different things. One of them is a grounding exercise. And in a time of solitude, you need a couple minutes, maybe 5 to 7 minutes. Clean your stethoscope, put it in your ears, get your landmarks, and come down to that apex. And you just listen to your heart. And for the first moment, you'll kind of hear you're listening for heart sounds. Like, do I got AFib? I know I'm 33, but do I got AFib? Then you're listening for breath sounds. And you just listen to your heart. It's that freaking simple. And bro, I'm telling you, after 7 minutes, you take them off and you're so zen. You just grounded yourself in the heart. And it's not that serious, but in a way, it's incredibly sacred just to be able to do that for yourself. It's a grounding exercise, and you do that outside of work to be able to use it inside. The other one is a little bit more complex, but it still just takes a couple minutes. Don't take more than 15 minutes. Don't take a long time at this. And it's kind of like a journaling exercise. You give yourself a nurse report in a very narrative way, and you recite backwards from where you're sitting after you got home. I'm sitting, I got out of the car, I drove home. I gave a report on my 18,000 patients because I was at a ratio. And I was in room 2 and we were coding him. I was in room 5 and I did this. And you take 3 questions with you. You hold on to the question. And as you go through your report, you allow the question to be answered. And you're going to answer these 3 as you sit, S-I-T. 1, what surprised me? And you ask, what surprised me? Oh, I taught that new grad something about X, Y, or Z. I was surprised that I was bold enough to come out and actually share this knowledge. You do it again from the top. Okay, I gave a report on this, blah, blah, blah. What inspired me? What literally inspired me? Perhaps it was that I sat and I took a longer moment to listen to a patient, and that was a non-medicinal medicine for that patient, to just be able to listen. And I'm inspired to be able to do that. And then thirdly, what touched me? What moved me? And as you find these little golden nuggets, you can take them with you and you can hold them. And you may not even remember them when you get to work, but how they made you feel will be fuel to you. And you kind of move in. And as you sometimes you remember them for an hour, 2 hours, 8 hours, and you go to sleep. But suddenly it will get to the point where you can enjoy and answer those questions in the moment that it happens, when you're interacting with the patient and you're right, boom, and you're just in, and that sense of satisfaction, that sense of flow you get into can include all this gold, and you keep that with you. And man, when I tell you, it's like you retain the richness from the experience to be able to do that. And I'm telling you, don't take a long time to do it. Do it real quickly, maybe 2-3 times a week. I do these 2 meditative practices just a couple times a week. I actually don't do them a lot, but they've been a great benefit to me.
That reminds me, because when I started nursing, and I felt like I was incompetent and I didn't know shit about anything. So I used to come home and similar to what you would do, I would reflect on what happened. But the 3 things that I would three things that I would think about is what happened. So let's say a patient coded. So what happened? The patient coded. What I learned that he was hyperkalemic, so we gave insulin. And then what could I have done differently? I didn't know where the insulin was kept, or I didn't know that my cabinet was not stocked. And then I kind of reflected on that. So for next time, I know, hey, check my supplies, know where the meds are, and check labs. And I just felt like I wasn't catching on as quickly as I should, which I feel like everybody feels that way. But I would always reflect on my day with those 3 things, what happened, what could I done better, and what I learned, and that helped me tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. It has the power to shift your perception,
right?
You always to answer those kind of questions,
right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love how you're so self-aware, man. It's so cool, and I'm really appreciating everything that you're sharing with us, because I'm taking this episode in, and I'm being selfish because I'm learning so much from you, man. You really are. Those people that are listening, I'm sure you're really you're shifting a perspective in us, because sometimes we get the best of ourselves where we're upset, we're going to work, and it's task. And you really are helping paint the picture of a really rich environment that's making a difference for you, because you're learning from it, and for the patient and every aspect, whether they go home, they pass away, the human interaction that you're saying that's been lost with,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure you probably get asked a bunch of times, but I feel like since you're an ER nurse, I got to ask you this. What's the craziest things you've seen in the ER?
Craziest thing I've seen in the ER.
Or what hit your heart the most? Like most emotional experience, or something crazy you saw, just anything like that.
What can I say? It's funny because when you ask ER nurses that, it's just kind of like every day is something, but it's, I don't know that I can give one specific thing, but one thing that I love about working in the ER that moves me, that impacts me, that creates family with the other ER nurses and the techs and physicians, is when you're coding somebody and you get ROSC, or when you're coding somebody and there's a fluidity there, and the communication is there and the teamwork is there. And when you leave out of that room, you know that you did well, and you know that you all just feel like some badass mother, you know what I'm saying? And the vibe is there, and you love it. And I don't know how it is in ICU. I mean, I've seen a few codes in ICU, but it seems different to me in ICU. But I don't know. What's your guys' experience with that there?
Dude, when you're talking, I just had this thing like, I had a few codes. I was sweating. You know, my glasses fell off during the code. They're hanging.
Oh God, are they foggy?
So somebody was taking off my glasses while I'm coding, and I'm just sweating, man. My shirt is kind of drenched, and I'll go to the bathroom. I wipe my face. I'm like, Matt, you're a fucking badass. That's like I'm not stroking my own ego. I'm just like, man, that was intense shit, man. Like,
yeah,
I don't think you don't get more of an adrenaline rush than honestly coding somebody, man. That maybe near death or bungee jumping, but dude, the adrenaline you're getting, and it's just so beautiful, that teamwork that you're having as a team. If it's running smooth, med surg codes, man, bad stories, right? But in the ICU, for the most part, you got a good squad. It runs pretty smooth, man. It's very rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, like you said, when you get that ROSC back and you walk out the room, it's like, damn, business. Even if you don't get the ROSC back, and you know when you ran a code well, you know when everybody was doing what they had to do, meds were passed on time, posted shit, clutch, everyone's working as a team. You walk out the room, you're like, damn, that was a fucking solid code, man. We haven't had that kind of code for a while. And even when you have a shitty code too, you're just like, damn, that code was kind of shitty. And everyone's like, that was a fucking code. But you know, it happens. We're not 100% all the time. And as a nurse, you don't judge yourself, or you shouldn't judge yourself on your bad days. You're the nurse you are on your good days. You know, I say that all the fucking time in the podcast.
Yeah.
I myself. A lot of F-bombs. I'm sorry.
No, I agree with you, man. I absolutely agree with you. Mm-hmm.
Mercy, it's been an awesome time on the show, man. I love how we talked about PTSD and burnout. I wish to get you back on in the future, because we didn't educate the nurses on how to maybe create this healing environment. We kind of talked about the bad, the ugly, and we talked a lot about healing, but it'd be cool to think about what kind of tips we could give to actually promote this healing environment in a situation that's shitty, unfortunately, because we don't have the perfect hospital that the NCLEX creates, right? We deal with things. We just, gotta do things our way. I'm sure you have to jury rig a few things to make, your shift go by. It's part of nursing, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to be back, man. I appreciate you too. I mean, like I said, you guys are freaking awesome. I appreciate what you guys are doing. We need more outlets like this. I appreciate you guys frontiering that, especially as men in nursing. That's even more rare and special. You have something to say, and I'm sure people are. I mean, I remember being young. I don't know about you guys, and seeing very few men in nursing and trying to connect and try. Do I have a place there? Is there something there for me? And so you guys are creating that space. So hats off to you guys.
Thank you so much, Emilio, for being with us. Really hits the heart. Share us your Instagrams. People can follow you, check you out, check out your ER experience.
Yeah. So like Nursey, but Mercy, MURSY_. MURSY_. You can catch me there. I'm just usually posting something about a little nugget I've learned from my shift, and I throw it out there if you want to comment and just have a conversation about it. I would love for you to come by and visit.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emilio. Thank you guys for listening. Glad you were here with us for this long, and make sure you give us 5 stars. If it ain't 5 stars, don't be waste your time, man. Check out Emilio.
All right. Peace, guys.